Welcome, everybody. This is Sar Colata. I'm an architect and an organizer of Disrupt Symposium, a 5-day virtual event dedicated to the topic of business of architecture. The first edition of Disrupt will take place 1st to the 5th of May and at 7 p.m. Central European Time. And we will welcome to stage C-level leaders, partners, directors, and founders of practices such as UN Studio, SOM, BIG, Oma Amo, Soneta, Safdie Architects, Zahadid Architects, Gensler, Perkins and Will, Woods Bagot, Arab, to name just a few. The event is sponsored by Graphisoft, Chaos, Tunark, Z by HP, Teradisi, and the IE School of Architecture and Design. To check the full speaker lineup and purchase your tickets, go to www.disruptsymposium.com. Early bird tickets are now available at 50% discount, and the offer runs at 1st of April. Today, we gathered for a 1-hour roundtable discussion dedicated to the topic of how to run a successful architecture practice, focusing on the subtleties of running a practice and building legacy in architecture. I invited Safdie Architects partners Christopher Mulvey and Scensor, who for over 30 years have been involved in the company, holding many positions as they've grown with this business. We're also being joined by Liu, which is the partner of WallaceLiu. She should be with us shortly. She represents a smaller practice established in London that has quickly developed an international reputation working in Asia and Europe. And also we have Keil, Principal and Director of Strategy at Zweig Group. Zweig Group has been providing business consultancy services to architecture firms for over 30 years in the USA, and now they've joined forces with me to service the international market with strategic planning, risk management, valuation, marketing, branding, business development, ownership transition, and mergers and acquisitions, and more. In this conversation, each speaker will present their unique perspective of the topic of success in architecture. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah.
Good afternoon, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Afternoon.
Good afternoon. So let's start with a question directed to Sean. Sean, Safdie Architects is a mega practice, and from the perspective of projects and the portfolio that you built, yet your actual core team counts less than 50 people, all working out of an office in Boston. Please share with me how you structured your business such that it is possible for you to deliver this tremendous work and still keep your team so small.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting us, Sarah. I mean, I think the questions that you raised for the symposium are really making us think internally about like how we practice. So it's been a great occasion to discuss those things specifically. So I'd say yes, we're a compact office. We routinely compete against major, huge mega practices of 800 people, 1,000 people. And it's often puts us in a kind of a David and Goliath kind of scenario. But we love that. We thrive on that sort of energy. We've had a lot of success building impactful projects around the world, which have been embraced by the public, and it's very rewarding to be part of it and to see that happening over many years. So. Is there a secret sauce to that success? I don't know, but I think we have evolved a very distinct method of practice at the office over the years. Chris calls it, or he's coined the term compact bigness, which I like, because it tries to blend this sort of attentiveness and intimacy of a small design studio with the firepower, the capacity, and the reach of a global large practice, mega practice. So how does it work? How do we do it? I think it as always, it starts with the people. It starts with the leadership. Moshe is very involved in the practice, and we've worked with him for years. Chris and I are part of a small core group of partners that have worked together for 20 plus years. We've seen each other's kids grow up. We're good friends. We like each other, and we've chosen to stay here and build this firm together. We're the next generation of the practice, of the legacy, and each of us have different talents, very different skills, and approach the practice in different ways. But I think there's constants. All of the partners are very, very hands-on, involved in the details of running the practice, of doing the projects, of designing. We're very agile, we're very nimble, we wear many hats, and very important is we're very selective in what we do and what we don't take on. And that, I think, is important to our success. So I think the result is that we've created this very intense environment in the office. I think my partner, Jaron, he says, oh, it's like, it has that sort of passion and energy of being in a Michelin star restaurant, in the kitchen, kind of making things happen, which is kind of the feeling and the sort of culture of excellence that we like to sort of have in the office. And that's what I think it inspires and motivates us, and as well as everyone, our staff and who are in the office. As a compact office, we have to find ways to leverage our strength and expand our reach. So we do that through, we've got a global network of consultants, of engineers, I'd say, structural engineers, landscape architects, environmental consultants who really allow us to do these very ambitious kind of structures that integrate nature and environment. It allows us to do, and these are people and firms that we rely on like family. We know them for years, and we know that they can deliver excellence. So what's more important, I think, than how we work is why do we practice in this way? I think you look back at the founding of the firm. Moshe started the practice in 1967 with Habitat 67. He was 26 years old, and he addressed in that one amazing project all the major issues of architecture and urbanism that I think we face and are still facing today. Incredible. So over 50 years, I think the practice has evolved a very strong set of a very strong design philosophy, a set of principles that runs sort of through our work. And I'd summarize it like that architecture has a social responsibility to create sort of humane environments that are connected with nature. I think if you have to put it in a simple way. And this is especially true at scale, right? As urban environments get more dense, this becomes even more important, right? And so to do this well, I think we have to think very systematically about making architecture and making cities more humane and livable. And it means we can't chase fashion. It's too important what we do. So we were taught that architects have a duty, a responsibility, I'd say almost a fiduciary duty to act on behalf of the public realm. That's important to us. And it's about having respect for the profession, respect for the value that we create as architects. And sort of this framework of principles and beliefs is kind of like our constitution, you would say. It grounds how we design, how we see our clients, how we see our projects, even how we see our partners and each other, our staff, right? So, you've asked in the conference sort of how do you build a successful practice? And I asked myself, well, what is success? And for me, I'd say success is not just building a lot of big commissions quickly or pure financial success. It's doing meaningful work, impactful work at a high level of excellence. And, that's what it's about. And staying compact for us allows us to stay connected to the work and be attentive and mindful of that. And so that's the living legacy, right? Of the practice. It's much bigger than any one partner or any one person's name.
Yes, that's super interesting. And actually, I wanted to sort of bring in Phil into this conversation because Phil, with his expertise, honestly works with practices of all different sizes. And just as some edit, also, G has just joined us. She had some connectivity issues, but we didn't want to disappoint and she showed up straight away. She just needs a moment. But the sort of intention behind putting this panel in this sort of format was to bring in the expertise coming also from different experiences. Obviously, Sean and Chris are representing a bigger practice that actually has quite a unique approach to how they run their operations. G, that I will connect here with soon, her practice is much smaller. She has a lot of, with her partner together, Wallace and Liu, they have already like international projects, and they've had a lot of great projects in China as well, where they started. And so I hope that she will share with us some stories about how the sort of experience went, also transitioning from China to Europe, and now they're based in London. But Phil, in that moment, I wanted to ask you, because your experience is very much cross-disciplinary, as for the last 30 years together with your team members, you've been providing sort of consultancy services for different architecture firms, working both with larger firms and smaller firms. So I think that sort of definition of success perhaps needs to be defined individually by each practice, but I think you'll have a really interesting perspective to share. So would you perhaps tell me what success means in architecture?
Well, that is a loaded question, Sarah.
It is a loaded question, I know.
No, I love, so absolutely individualized, customized, fitting the culture, the history, the values of the organization. What was the intention around the founding? I love the way that Sean kind of framed it, which, it really starts with the why around the work that you do, the design that you do. I mean, there are, certainly, mega firms and small practices that compete at different scales. And there's firms that are high design. There are firms that are not doing that, more of the, what I would classify as kind of the bread and butter type of work, the things that make impact on society, certainly, and how people interact with the spaces that are being designed, but aren't necessarily going for the quality and design awards that certain practices go for. And I think all of that is perfectly acceptable under the banner of success. And so it becomes this: how do we build a framework, and how do we define our purpose, define our legacy, define that why we are doing what we're doing, in order to appropriately orient the structures and the service that firm provides, such that we can achieve what our definition of success is. It's one of the largest kind of discussions I get into with clients rather frequently is growth. And what does growth mean? I think growth, a lot of times, people make that synonymous with success. And growth is not just revenue. Growth is not just billings. It's not just people. There can be growth defined in several different ways. And so that's quite I do strategic planning work with, primarily work here in the United States, but have, several international clients as well. That becomes a major focus of the discussion is, okay, now that we've determined why we might exist as an organization, how do we define growth, and what does that mean for us? And one of the topics that's been coming, that's really relevant here more recently, I love Sean's analogy to a 5-star Michelin restaurant. We're talking a lot about client experience within the framework of strategic planning and what we're doing with our clients. What are the major objectives that maybe architecture firms have with their client base, and how do they see them from a philosophical standpoint, so we can build strategy? And one of the things that keeps coming up over and over seemingly recently is this idea of radical hospitality, which is what Michelin star rated restaurants are all about, in addition to a lot of the quality and the excellence and the pursuit of excellence as well. So I think, again, it's a very individualized exercise that you have to really self-reflect. The best leaders, the best architects that I've interacted with spend a lot of time in self-reflection on why I'm doing what we're doing, what kind of legacy am I leaving, and how is that impacting my clients, my people, and the community at large.
Hey, Phil, what you bring up about scale is really interesting because it's something we grapple with a lot. It's that, should we be growing? Is that a definition of what we need to do in order to make a bigger impact? And we've always come back to this answer that we really don't need to do that. That's not the point. Growth and scale is not the point. It's really quality and excellence and attention that really makes the difference. And I think if growth comes, great. And if we can maintain a level of quality and control, terrific. But we think we can make impact even at a small scale of office that we're in. So
I think, because it really comes to the question of primacy. Where is your prime focus? And if it's growth just to grow, if it's just to meet some arbitrary metrics, I think that lacks a lot of power. It lacks a lot of impact, and you don't see as much success. And whether you have grand ambitions of world domination or you're really focused on the little community that you're serving, I think answering that, the result is most likely growth. And if you really believe in what you're doing and think the quality of the work that you're doing is excellent, and your service is excellent, then why wouldn't you want that to impact more people? And I think that often ends up growth as a result or an outcome of kind of tackling those core purpose ideas.
Mm-hmm. I think I like Phil, I like your point too. There's different ways to sort of interpret growth, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think when you mention growth, I think the first two terms or phrases or metrics that come to mind are size of practice and sort of revenue, right? And I think you can actually grow revenue without growing the size of the office in some respects, and you can grow as individuals, you can grow as a practice, you can grow your methodology and your framework, and you can grow the value that you create, all without sort of growing size. So I think finding a way to talk about it in a bit more of a comprehensive manner, or sort of really looking at the multifaceted way that you talk about growth, I think is really quite important, because increasingly, and I think everyone, most firms saw this probably over the last 2 years, we were faced with these tremendous changes in how we practice and how we work. And there seems to be this great sort of interest and openness in sharing information, sharing policy, sharing networks, sharing approaches, that sort of everyone became much larger all of a sudden because we were trying to deal with something collectively. And so seeing the profession move in that type of a direction, you can grow very quickly. And I think that's what we'll come back to in a little bit. I think we've been able to find ways to grow also size without actually growing the size ourselves, right? So you can be it by doing it by being resourceful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Chris.
Chris, actually, I wanted to ask about more like the internal aspects within the practice of growing, because both with Sean as partners in the practice, you're directly responsible for growth and bringing new clients and new projects. And all these efforts are reflected in your compensation as well, meaning that basically, much like business owners, your day-to-day decisions affect profitability. Tell me how you manage to keep the value and the respect intact in this business and stay away from being commoditized and compromised on the aspects of value, how you deliver that through projects.
That's the question, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest question we sort of all grapple with. And, I'll probably talk on a lot of the same points and maybe some of the same phrasing that Sean started with. I'll try and take them in a different direction, but they're really quite related. So again, to get to that question, let's go back to success, right? How do you define success? And Sean said, for us, it's doing meaningful projects, right? That's one value. Projects that have lasting impact on individuals and communities. And, then looking at it from the business perspective, why is that important to business, for your business? Well, we found doing good work is the best form of business development. It far outweighs setting up a new office in a new market or pursuing things you haven't done before or trying to get into different sort of typologies or sectors. It's you do good work because that makes talented people want to join the firm, right? That makes talented people want to stay with the firm because you continue to do good work. It makes passionate clients want to participate and work with the firm. And so all of this it's not about just successfully running, it's really trying to set up a system that's sustainable, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we were very fortunate, and we know this, our firm was very successful from the outset. Habitat 67 was the firm's first project, and we understand that that's given and afforded us things that firms just starting out, don't always have. And so really the question becomes, how do you make that sustainable? How do you set up a sustainable system and a methodology so that you can keep doing that? And so, yes, we want to do meaningful work, but from a practice side and an operational side, it's equally, if not more important, to have a structure and a business model that allows you to deliver those meaningful projects in a way that you find enjoyable and challenging and rewarding, provides you the ability to grow and learn and expand, and doing all of that in a manner that's consistent with your core beliefs and your values and your principles. That's really quite important. One way we've done that, or one way of approaching that, is to be really selective of the work that you do. We choose our projects and our clients very carefully. It's based on qualitative factors and opportunities rather than typology or sector or region. We don't participate in exercises where the expectation is you can produce a sketch or a concept in a few weeks' time. We retain the copyright and intellectual property of all the work that we do. Design's not a commodity to us at all, we think, and considering it as such and participating in those types of exercises, devalues the complexity and the value of what we deliver. So I think holding to those principles is critical. I think that helps to ensure that there's a respect and the value you're maintaining both internally and externally. We don't take on projects where we can't be involved in construction. We design with the intention of building, right? It's integral to what we do. And if, projects come to us that don't allow us to do a meaningful project, to work in a manner that we think is will result in a humane project that has the resources to do it appropriately, then we'll turn those commissions away. And, that's never easy. But we value our time and we want to spend our time wisely. I mean, I think, we put a lot into the work that we do as a profession, and you want to work on things that are rewarding and satisfying. It's certainly easier to be selective when you're a bit more compact. We don't have hundreds of staff or talented employees to sustain, but there's financial impact at any scale, to being selective. And so you have to have a framework where there's a financial buffer, that you can sort of keep everyone engaged and together when there isn't a full workload of building projects. We found that these little opportunities they offer opportunities for development and growth and exploration that are outside the framework of a normal project. So they can be really interesting little sort of forays in between projects, and they can be these fantastic little incubators if you treat them right and sort of offer them to the staff, and they're great chances to develop in a very accelerated manner. I'm still trying to come back to answering the question that you started with.
Chris, sorry, can I add one thing actually about I think that it's important that the compensation models of partners and ownership reflect the values that are in the practice, and I sort of say you have to follow the money, and you'll really uncover the real values of the practice. Money can enable things, but it also is a source of evil in partnerships, where it's people start to, focus on business development, who brings in the most revenue, who controls staffing and has power in the office, and it starts to breed things like hierarchy and defensiveness and silos. And we came pretty organically to this idea of like the core partners actually share compensation equally and ownership equally, because it takes that out of the equation for us, and then it can focus us on really the results and make us more open to criticism, more open to sharing, like staffing the right people, not just the person who brought it in, but staff the right person for that project at the right time. And we felt that's very liberating in a way for us, and it aligns with our sort of humanistic.
It changes the dynamic of the office completely. I think it's more collegial, it's less territorial. We're actually always placing multiple partners on projects. I think not that the scale always requires that to be the case. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, sometimes there's three. But I think there's this notion of duality, of different perspectives, of this sort of openness and communication that we enjoy. I mean, I think part of this is it's about the dialogue, right? We enjoy working on the products. We enjoy working with fantastic and insanely talented engineers and consultants. And so it's the whole discourse around the project that that makes the working environment. And so that's what you appreciate. And we've tried to set up a system, and the financial model, as Sean was saying, it sort of reflects those values. And I think that's very important, because that starts to talk about a way that the business is structured that really isn't a business built around an individual or someone who's the rainmaker bringing in projects or the strong design talent. It reinforces the need that it's a collective profession, it's a collective pursuit. And I think we've gone from we've started as an office that was founded by an individual and built around an individual to now one that's successful and being run as a collective, where he's very much involved in that group as we are. And we've been evolving the methodology and the practice over the last 20 years, working for, then working with and alongside each other. And it's sort of an interesting way to talk about that, because it does get back towards this question of legacy. It's trying to build a sustainable model, it's a sustainable framework so that the firm can continue. And I think you need to do that both from an architectural and a firm value standpoint, where your principles are clear, and that's something people come and believe in and embrace, and that carries the work forward. And then there's also the financial and operational side of things that needs to reinforce that, but is also set up to be sustainable in its own manner.
That is super interesting, Chris. And Sean, I think it's, everything should be derivative of the vision, missions, and values for the organization, of course. And it seems that you've really embraced that and are living it. One of the things that I often talk about is, if we're going to be a legacy organization in any way, shape, or form, one of the things that comes to the forefront of your mind is leadership and ownership succession, and the importance of building a robust, what I'll call, I guess, an internal stock market, or an internal desire to be a part of that group, right? And inevitably, we kind of spiral and come around to, not to focus on more of the challenging aspects of this, but subpar work and those people that we feel maybe aren't contributing 100%, yet we have this very ubiquitous or equitable model, I guess, of ownership within the firm. And so I'd be really curious from an accountability, or kind of how you manage the operational side of that, and if you've seen any real challenges derive, because I can certainly see all of the virtuous components and the reasons why that might be really an excellent model to adopt.
That sort of model has to come along with a culture of excellence, because I always am so thankful that I'm surrounded by people who are smarter than I am, and it forces you to be on the top of your game, and you're constantly being inspired and motivated by the people around you. So it doesn't have to be a financial, monetary kind of incentive, in fact, sometimes it works against you. It's better to be just inspired and have a culture that you're immersed in that actually, drives that sort of excellence. Like, there's nobody sort of sitting around and leaning back, because it just doesn't work with the culture. So
yeah.
I wanted to direct the question at G. G, it's great to have you here, despite the difficulty of connecting. I know that you are a smaller practice in Safdie Architects, however, already have experience with international presence, specifically working in China and moving to London. I wanted to ask you to speak to us about some challenges that you're facing, or maybe faced in the past, and how did you navigate through them?
Yeah. Well, it's quite interesting when I heard Chris saying that we will not take on a project that we cannot be involved in the construction process. I think it's such a luxury to be able to say that. I just remember I had a brief conversation in one event when I was sharing one of my Chinese projects alongside Zaha, who's sharing their successful Chinese project, which we've kind of had a brief discussion on how is it possible to deliver high quality build result in China, which is a very challenging market to do that. Which the director from Zaha simply just said, well, we don't have the luxury of guaranteeing any outcome. And of course, there's been discussion about, Soho's being the good example, but then Guangzhou Opera House is utter failure on the build quality. So anyway, they were saying, because we had such a enormous cost associated with our presence globally. We cannot afford to deliver everything to its best extent. So I think there's that's somehow a lot of our experience in China was due with not necessarily fighting for getting paid per job, but there's a lot of complicated battle you have to go through to try and make sure you can deliver your end image even 70% close to your starting point. I guess that has always been the reality check of practicing globally. And we were very small and we were very mobile. So in a way, we could be there all the time and get involved. I'm sure as a much larger firm or as a proper established large practice, you cannot, be involved in everything personally. But probably for sure, there's a rank of projects to pay attention to. But somehow we were trying our best. So every moment we try and be there. But even then, it was very hard to achieve. As I said, the best result will be you hit on 70% of what you wanted to achieve as the best image, and everything is negotiation. And there's also political challenge as well. And it's not just sort of coming down to build cost. Somehow it's to do with why delivering that image and to achieve also the political agenda and fulfill whose ambition sort of question. And coming back to London, interestingly, I discovered that I was expecting a very different market where things were regulated in a very different way. It's a very sort of insurance based. It's very much sort of minimum sort of interruption on the business side. But in reality, you still have quite a lot of battles to go through as a small practice, because you can easily be calling on a bid to bid for a very large scheme or public funded scheme, or as well as other collaborations with much larger firms. And in the end of the day, winning the bid doesn't mean that you get the job. So as a small practice, you have to negotiate your position from the beginning to the end. And that position shifts drastically, depends on how you steer it. You have to somehow, what I experienced is that politically it's not much easier than what we have done in China, but just somehow it's just slightly wrapped in a different sort of package. In a way, you kind of have this really well organized process, but actually there's lots of space to remover within that very well sealed up process.
It's interesting because, Chris, I know you spent 6 years in Shanghai delivering a project. Do you want to share with us this experience, and if that perhaps can speak also to what Ji just shared?
Sure. No, I think it's what Ji was mentioning certainly is a struggle for all of us. I spent 6 years there with my family. It was supposed to be 18 months. Sean told me it was going to be 18 months, and so we decided to go. The kids were quite young at that point, but we set up an office in Shanghai because we had a project under construction. And so, I mean, again, we followed the project and we opened an office to oversee the execution of the work. We didn't open the office to pursue new work. And again, that's a different approach. It didn't require us going through the formations and setting up an office and really everything that comes with it, right? I mean, I think that's a big investment to go open an office in a new area for the purpose of business development. So for us, it was to be able to go back to the beginning, was to be able to do meaningful, good work. We needed to be there, right? So we didn't have an office. We decided it was the time for someone to go. We talked about it. About 6 weeks later, I found myself living in Shanghai. We didn't have an office space, so Arab, who we've been working with for years, allowed us to have 3 desks in their office, and we bootstrapped for the first couple of weeks and first couple of months. And after we were there for about 6 months, we received the commission in Chongqing, and then therefore, the office sort of blossomed very quickly in Shanghai, and we grew. We grew in a very interesting manner. I mean, I think I came from Boston. But then we hired all local staff, and by local staff, it was people who were based in Shanghai, but one was Australian, and others worked in a German office in Shanghai, and 2 from Taiwan, one Malaysian architect. And we would send them to Boston, and they would work in Boston for 3 months. They would work with the design team, and then they would come back. And we would send people from Boston to stay in the office in Shanghai. And yes, everyone comes for a workshop, I would tell Sean, you're going to come for the workshop for 3 days and make them stay for 2 weeks. And we try and overlap. And so, there's the idea of co-location where we can sort of really spend time working collectively, collegially. It allows everyone to understand a bit more of what we're doing. And therefore, it allows the local team not just to be the production side or the on-site team. They're integral to the process and can help sort of go through. And so for us, we saw all the challenges that G mentioned, and it took time and it took those years to explain to the client and to show the value, to explain that you do create value in the later stages of a project. You do create value on site. The drawings are done, but the design's not done and the design's not finished. And so part of that was really working with the contractors and the site team, the client's team, and all the professional staff really to go through that process. And we learned a tremendous amount about what to do and what not to do. And I think they also learned. And so, we were fortunate that we were able to get a couple of projects sort of in parallel. So that allowed us to sustain the office for a number of years. And as those projects came to completion, we sort of contracted the team there. Some went to Singapore, some came back to Boston, and we sort of, we evolved that, man, in a fairly sort of organic sense, I would say.
So Chris is not being hyperbolic when he's saying we don't take on work that we can't be on site. I can't think of a project we did without being on site and following through. In Marina Bay Sands, we had 8 people on the site, and Project Jewel, we have a whole office in Singapore following, and Chongqing, we had people there as well. So we really, really take that seriously, and we've been able to convince the clients to support that. But it's true. It's a luxury, but I think the clients see the value in it. At the end, they thank us and they say that was the best decision we made to have you guys there all the way through the end.
And we've utilized that. I think in terms of the conversations we had with the clients that were based in China, they spoke a lot with our clients who were in Singapore to sort of really understand. And again, you do good work, you do meaningful work, and the clients, the consultants, they become advocates for the value you're creating. And in Singapore, yes, the decision to take the Sky Park and put it on the roof of the towers, that creates tremendous value for the client. But putting 15, 16 people on site for 3 years, sending summer interns over to Singapore to work on the project, that creates tremendous value in terms of the execution and just the development of everyone as well.
Yeah, this is, so Sarah, not to completely disrupt the thing, but this is a fascinating conversation that I'm really interested in. So at Zweig Group, our vision is to elevate the industry through being the leaders in driving purpose and performance for the AEC universe. And one of the things that has been really interesting is this, where, our positioning and where our point in the value creation for a client fits as an architecture firm. How do we view that? And I think when we look back at 08, 09, 10, where we were facing, the Great Recession, what we saw was a ton of success in these boutique specialized thought leadership firms that were really, really good at something that wasn't, the jack of all trades, kind of trying to be everything to everyone kind of organization. Well, fast forward to today and some of the global and economic pressures that are being placed on firms. And what we're seeing is more of this thought process around, there's certainly, what are our working capital needs and kind of shoring up the organization, but from a value chain, it's looking more like a supply chain, and it's seemingly trending the other direction. Whereas we are concerned about that the entire supply chain that you couldn't even 5 years ago you wouldn't even describe architecture or engineering as a supply chain kind of model. But we're looking at things from where does the sustainable sourcing and humane sourcing come from all the way through construction and then while it's in use. And so a lot of firms, I think, are having this conversation, or at least I'm having this conversation with a lot of firms when we're designing strategy, is how far do we want to go? How much of that supply chain and that value chain are we trying to touch, influence, and impact? And I think it's a really interesting dynamic between the guests that we have on the panel, between G's approach and Safdie's approach on how that takes a look. And I think there's obviously, constraints and kind of practical constraints around some of the ability to do some of those things based on size, resources, and a number of other factors. But I think it's the big interest that I have in it, and besides just the impact on how you structure your organization, is the value pricing conversation, or the value model that Chris kind of brought up or surfaced earlier, which is, how do we not become a commodity as technology and machine learning and artificial superintelligence and all of these considerations come into play? How do we communicate and execute and organize in such a way that we can continue to make an impact and provide that value, and not only provide that value, but get recognized and maybe compensated for the creation of that value as well?
I mean, the whole financial model of professional fees is working against moving the direction you're talking about, right? I mean, it's a financial model and a professional fees model that talks about it purely as a service.
Right.
You get the most fee on this phase because that's the most people involved, that's the most hours you put on paper, which is accurate, but the value of those hours are different from different phases and different levels of involvement, right? So you create, as architects, when you're creating an identity for a project or for a client, or you're really deciding and implementing, how the public space is going to work within this district or in this city that's going to impact people, you're creating tremendous value there. Yeah, that's usually the smallest phase in terms of time and fee, and the one that some clients are seeming to expect more as sort of the entrance into getting the rest of the fee, the rest of the labor, right? So, and that's on us as a profession of trying to find a better way to talk about the value we create and what we offer. And yes, there's a service side of it, and we are obviously a profession that is in service of others, but that doesn't necessarily mean we just offer a service, right? I think the value creation that's there, and the recognition, and I think we're moving in that direction. I think we've seen that certainly since Marina Bay Sands, and how that project really opened, I would say, a lot of developer clients and mixed-use developers opened their eyes to the value of design in their project and what it would allow them to do and what it would allow them to achieve. And that's changed the game a little bit. But I think, we're not having enough discussions as a profession, as a group, of trying to move in that direction.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
No, I was going to say, it's the relationship between that's set up between owner and service provider, architect as service provider, which I hate that term. And I always think it should be a much more of a different kind of relationship, more like a marriage, where it's important to have a mutual, the owner and service provider. So the owner has all the power, the service provider provides a service in exchange for compensation. In the other model, if as peers with a client and an architect, in a position that one can offer something more like a peer. And that sort of marriage, or idea is interesting, because it's like you're declaring your intent, your relationship to continue. You're declaring that to the world as a whole. You're saying this is important. And I think if that sets up a much more healthy interaction between client and architect, and then the result of that would be, or should be, a very healthy, a healthy building, that has a life of its own. It's like a child that comes out of that really has independence and a healthy product, And so that sort of relationship is the one that we try and engender with working with our clients, which has been really, really rewarding.
Yeah. Certainly, my contention is that if we allow others to define the value of our services for us, then we are going to be, we're at significant risk to be a commoditized service. It's really just about inputs rather than outcomes. It's really about that, and you lose that component. And I'm afraid that architects are not comfortable, perhaps, being, sending that message, or at least owning that message and taking that ownership over that responsibility to say, we are not a commodity, and this is the value that we create, and how we need to look at those services. Yet when you look at the internal structures and the systems that we put in place over generations, it is all structured towards looking at the inputs of our effort and not the outcomes of the buildings that we're designing. And there are a few leaders that are now really starting to think differently about this, I think. But I don't think anybody would be upset if we just did away with timesheets. But I also don't think that anyone ever see a world where that's not how we're measuring, right? And we're not doing that on a regular basis. Yet that is strictly an input, and the different things, the feed hours and the time and materials and all of those things, those different contract types that are structured in such a way that all we're looking at is the efforts and not the outcomes of the spaces that we're designing. How does it impact education and the ability for children to thrive? What are the healthcare outcomes? What are the things that are important in the spaces that you design for as an architecture firm? And how do we structure a fee and a value model such that it recognizes our ability to provide outcomes rather than just the level of effort that we put into it?
Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting what you say, Phil. And frankly, I almost want to ask an open question because leading to this discussion, I had a conversation with Sean and Chris, and they said something that really touched me. They said, we're not a brand. We're not a fashion house. We're not reinventing ourselves. It's all about living legacy. And I know that both Phil and you guys can speak to that, but I think it's really important because right now that sort of topic of branding in architecture is very hot. Mm-hmm. And everyone gets this advice of niching out and communicating that with your clients. But I think that perhaps sometimes, like when you're very small, that might be also problematic because there's this element of, wanting to grow, perhaps wanting to also expand your portfolio. So not just focus on residential or one type of construction. So there's this sort of conflict of which way do I go? Do I communicate that I'm really good at doing that one thing? Or do I also move my practice past that into more interesting projects? And I think that, it certainly is, again, very relevant to the group and the practice, but that sort of topic of brand versus legacy and how you build that is what's interesting. Yeah.
Well, when I think about building or how to build a successful architecture practice, I think about answering some of those fundamental questions that we've already talked about why we exist and all the things. But the thing that I hear most frequently from firms is they're not really sure, or there's wide disagreement at the principal level within the architecture firm, and the shareholders still, they have varying different opinions of what that might look like. And you'll have to forgive me. So I'm my background, my education is chemical engineering and physics. So I try to make an equation out of everything. And so culture equation for me is values plus behaviors, right? And when you look at culture just broadly in the context of business and strategy, culture is certainly the kind of ultimate. It takes precedence over the strategy piece. You can put the most excellent strategies you have together, but if the culture is working against it, then you're not going to be successful. However, as you grow your practice from very small to very large, this gets lost. And I think we fail to have the conversations necessary to inculcate the values and the behaviors within an organization that lead to a robust and healthy culture. And that's you get significant pushback as you continue to scale your practice around that, because you hear things like, we're family culture, we have a team mentality or family. There's different iterations of it. But what does that mean? And if we were to play that game, and I was to separate every single person in a practice into a different room, they would all give me some variation or difference with that. And as you scale up the organization, we don't talk about it. And so whatever influence that individual that is new to the organization comes in and has, you end up putting what I call Band-Aids in place for having a healthy culture and value structure that we're talking about, which are things like systems, processes, procedures, and approval. All of those things that degrade and make people feel like I'm being treated like a number and I'm not a person anymore, and I'm not a core component to this practice. And so I think the disciplined approach in how you structure that and asking the right questions is the key to success, regardless of size of your organization. I think it's what allows you to successfully scale from a very small practice to a very large practice, because you end up attracting those that believe what you believe and how you approach those things. And as long as you execute that well, which is no easy task, of course, then that really sets the stage for it. And the way that we think about it at Zweig Group, and there's a number of different ways to think about it, but kind of putting the North Star in place, the vision, the mission, values, like we've already discussed, and then putting a flexible, transparent, and adaptable structure that kind of connects that North Star, that purpose, that why we exist, to what is happening in the next 90 days to help us move closer towards those ideas. And so we set up a structure that is kind of 4 tiers, where you define those long-term objectives, and it cascades into strategies, which are really philosophical directions and allow us that flexibility within a disciplined approach to define what initiatives and what actions are happening within the next year or the next 90 days that really is a successful model to continue moving forward. So you'll hear certainly different kind of frameworks. There's tons of them out there. I don't think anybody has a monopoly on the perfect structure and approach to strategy. But there's OKR, and there's kind of balanced scorecard and those kinds of things. And those are the things, if you can answer a few of those questions, allow you a much more fluid, decentralized approach, scalable approach and solution to meet the objectives that you're looking to meet as an architecture practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to say business is also very personal. So in a way, I'm just making a very personal example. When we were out in China, if we would start with housing, particularly speculative tower development, tower blocks, it's very easy to deliver, and we will be able to expand very quickly. Actually, not just housing, but there are other projects along the way which will allow us to scale up very quickly, which we didn't really, not necessarily not picked up, but somehow we kind of not really driving in that direction. So a few reasons. One is to do with, as you mentioned, Phil, finding a niche is quite important. Of course, and Sarah said, okay, so all about getting the branding done. So this is my niche, and here's how I package it. That's my branding. And in reality, it's much more complicated than that. Because as a small firm, what I discovered is that, your niche is changing, as well as what you're interested in. So when we started out in China, we were interested in adaptive reuse. And I was very interested in heritage conservation in a way. And I was very interested particularly in modern conservation, which is something that doesn't have a defined market. So in a way, our first challenge is to sell a product that hasn't have enough precedence. Not only that we don't have a precedence to offer, we can't say, this is what we built over here, and now we give you the same product over there. We're going to build it, like for like. We can't do that. So in a way, I think there's a massive risk, and it's been a risk we had knowledge of. In a way, you kind of somehow you're hand in hand juggling between, shall I take the struggle journey, which I might eventually realize my dream job or dream project. It will take me 5 years to get there. And within that 5 years, 3 of those, I'm not making any penny. Is that the sort of journey you want to drive down to? So I think in a way, it's interesting to come out from a perspective. We want a really useful equation that would help us to. And sometimes we do look back and go, regret, if we didn't really stand our ground so firmly and just allow them to knock down the 1,000-year-old heritage, we would have got 20 million job, and we would have been in a different place. On the other hand, life isn't so. So in a way, I would say there's also courage to be sort of unleashed for small practices, even though, because I think, the reality is as you grow, you have to accommodate. As Chris mentioned, things need to be sustainable. You want something that's long lasting and drives on, even though it's not a fashion house, but it's something passed on, some sort of legacy that's long lasting and grows. But that somehow comes with how much you depart from your original point. And in a way, somehow you inevitably have to productize what you produce, even though we say we are a creative industry. But in the end of the day, it's more and more becoming specialized products. So in that way, we're almost becoming suppliers. I would say as architects.
It's a fascinating. I mean, you brought it around to sort of a really fascinating point, because this notion of being a specialist or being or choosing not to specialize, and we've decided to try and not specialize, but certainly we're focusing on a series of building types that are very similar over recent years, because that's what we're doing and that's what clients are understanding and coming to us for. But the decision to specialize or not to specialize is a really critical decision. And for us, it's yes, what you might be interested in changes, but we're interested in doing interesting things, right? And so it could be a different typology, it could be a different area. We're trying to find interesting work that's rewarding and satisfying and is also meaningful. And so by being selective, it actually makes that, I think, a little bit easier when you're specialized.
Chris, I thought you made a really interesting point that underlies everything, which is you have to have courage and be able to manage this kind of risk. I mean, it's terrifying sometimes to turn down those projects that could pay the bills, but you want to stick to your principles and what the impact of that decision is going to be down the road, that it's going to send your practice in the wrong direction. And we have to deal with those. And big office or small office, we have to be in those terrifying situations where we're trying to determine how much risk are we going to take, what kind of risk, and do we trust in each other enough that we know we're going to weather through it and get past it. And it's I think it's consistent among all of us. We're all one noble profession, as Moshe likes to say. And it's we're all feeling it in different ways.
Absolutely. I'm gonna drop maybe a large idea that needs more unpacking than we have time for towards the end here. But to bring it back to Sarah's original question about branding, this answering those large questions and that strategy informs and influences what that brand and that reputation should look and feel and sound like. And when looking broadly speaking at what the purpose of strategy is it's building and sustaining a competitive advantage, which is always relative and it's changing and is always being influenced, right? But when you look broadly speaking, with few exceptions, at architecture firms and what their competitive advantage can look like, I take an internal and external perspective perhaps on this. And the external perspective is your brand. It's what can we deliver to the external forces. Internally, it's your culture, right? And there's different ways to attack that and think about that. But those are the two. Generally, how do you do that? Through marketing and branding, your engine, the kind of quality, the relationships that you have on both the internal and external. So the highly leveraged activities that you can do to run a successful firm are those that cross both of those boundaries, things that can address the culture of your organization plus the external brand and reputation that'll carry you across time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, all of you. I do have to wrap this up. It's such an interesting conversation. Sean, Chris, G, Phil, it was a fruitful discussion and I certainly learned a lot. Thank you also for Daily for this tremendous opportunity and support with the symposium, and also a big thank you to everyone that listened in. Roundtable discussions like this will be held in this format here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central European Time. You can save the day in your calendar and keep your eyes peeled here, as well as on my social media for further announcements of future topics and guests. Please also go to www.disruptsymposium.com to reserve your seat for 1st till the 5th of May. All our panelists will present in-depth keynotes. Chris Mulvey and Scensor will give a presentation titled Compact BIGNESS, How We Realize Mega Projects Without a Mega Office. Keil will speak to Leaving Your Legacy, Strategic Planning and Purpose-Driven Leadership. And Liu will share with us a presentation on a topic of people, culture, equality, inclusion, and diversity in the workplace, which we sort of touched on in this conversation. I didn't have the right moment to divert to, but I think we will cover that in more detail at Disrupt. So don't forget, 50% early bird tickets are available until 1st of April. So go to the website now. We'll see you all there. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you everyone involved.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank
you, Phil.
Absolutely.